Based on early English folk drama, adapted by Olivia Webb. For as far as Sir George's eyes could see, the kingdom's farmland hills were burning. His pounding heart echoed the thundering clip-clop of his horse hoofs as he rode down the empty road. The sky overhead was black with smoke. Sir George's enchanted sword, Ascalon, swung at his side, glimmering in the firelight. The sword was like no other. "Slasher, you brute," Sir George thought as he squinted through the smoke. "You think by kidnapping the woman I love you'll get my sword? Nay, but my sword you will be slain, just as tall as a knight, but possessing enormous dark ambition. Slasher was the most full and furious of dragons. He was the one who had set the hills aflame. His fiery breath burned through fields across the kingdom. His white-hot claws melted ordinary weapons, but not Ascalon. The sword alone prevented Slasher from overtaking the kingdom. Only Ascalon could defeat him. With the sword, Slasher would be invincible. He knew he could allure Sir George and Ascalon as long as he held Sabra captive. The terrible thought of the dragon imprisoning his beloved Princess Sabra made Sir George grip more tightly at the reins. He needed to save her, yet the fate of the kingdom also rested on him as the protector of the sword. He had to keep Ascalon safe from Slasher. "I must find Slasher," he thought with a grimace, his intense gaze reflecting the light of the flames around him. Sir George pressed onward through the fear that rose within him like a strong stone wall. "I cannot fail. I must slay him. I have to save Sabra." Hours later, Sir George entered Dragon's Teeth, a reign where strange stone formations stood as high as castle towers. Tying his horse out of sight, he climbed to the peak of a steep and rocky slope and looked over the other side. Down below, a murky lake was dominated by an enormous tree. Below its branches, Sabra stood, tied to a stone post. Slasher glowered from his perch on the strong branch above her head. Even at a distance, Sir George could not see the dragon's yellow eyes. Darting from stone to stone, Sir George stealthily descended down the slope. Sabra began talking to distract the dragon when she saw him sneaking close. "Cobra's bones!" Sabra cursed. "Why do dragons prey upon princesses anyway? Men are plumper, probably tastier too." "Beware, madam, you are bait, or should I say dessert," Slasher said, stretching the last word and hissing each S. "I do not talk with my food." "Sniveling lizard," she said. "Enough!" Slasher snarled, slinking toward her. "Your knight is taking too long with his sword. Perhaps it wouldn't hurt to try a bite." "Here I stand," Sir George announced with his deep voice as he withdrew Ascalon. A strange heat shot through him. He held the sword aloft. "And I hold the weapon you seek." "I see," Slasher jeered as he whooped to the ground. His yellow eyes roved over the sword. "You knights like your sword-fighting duels. Since this is a duel for a sword, let's hold our fight within a sword-fighting circle," he said, using the tip of his spiked tail to draw a large half circle in the dirt. "Do you accept my challenge?" Narrowing his eyes, Sir George used the tip of his sword to draw the circle's other half. He stepped in. "I accept." Slasher compressed his wings against his sides to prepare for combat. For a few seconds, the rivals slowly mirrored each other's movements, encircling one another on opposite sides of the circle. Slasher moved right. Sir George moved left. Sir George moved right. Slasher moved left. The air was silent. Then the dragon attacked. With a roar, Slasher charged forward, swinging his talons. Sir George held up his shield against the dragon's fiery breath. Metal clashed. Sparks flew, amplifying his strength, increasing his speed. Ascalon enabled Sir George to meet Slasher's searing talons, blow for blow. Suddenly, Slasher whipped his spiked tail toward the knight's legs. "Watch out!" Saber called. Too late. Sir George leaped over the spikes, but the weight of his armor slammed him forward. Sneering, Slasher snapped open his wings, grasped Sir George in his claws, and lifted him to the air directly over the circle. A sharp pain shot down the knight's side. Beneath Slasher's white-hot talons, the knight's armor started to melt. Overcoming the pain, Sir George swung the sword over his head and punctured Slasher's wing. Slasher let go of him with a screech, and they both fell to the ground. Slasher looked to his wounded wing and howled with rage. He blew an enormous ball of fire high in the air, and then a lower one, which ignited the circle on the ground around them. The fire rose as high as fortress walls. From this point onwards, Sir George would have to fight the dragon within the circle's blazing wall of flame. Fueled by fury, they fought in a blur of movement, each swipe faster than last. Then, beyond the fire, Saber screamed, "Charge!" Sir George quickly looked up and through the blaze. The dragon's ball of fire has consumed the top branches of the tree that towered over where Saber was tied. Soon, the flaming branches would snap and fall. If he did not act at once, Saber would burn alive. Taking advantage of the knight's distraction, Slasher veered forward with an upward swing of his spiked tail. Sir George managed to escape, but a spike caught against his sword and flung it upward out of his hands. It arched high into the air, spiraling over the wall of flames and out of sight. Sir George felt his heart sink. If Slasher won, Sabra would die. The kingdom would perish. Slasher would be unstoppable. Without his weapon, Sir George did the only thing he could: dodge. But Sir George's aching wounds slowed him down. He tripped. Slasher stood over Sir George and unfurled his wings to their greatest height in victory. Meanwhile, on the other side of the circle, Sabra felt a flash of hope. The sword had landed point first in the dirt, directly behind the stone post to which she was tied. She slid herself down, and feeling behind her, she pressed her wrist up and down against the sword's blade until it severed her ropes. Using all her strength, Sabra hurled the sword toward the fiery wall. "Take that, you lizard!" she yelled as the sword disappeared out of sight. "Knight!" Slasher bellowed, white-hot talons raised. "These blades don't make thee feel." At that very moment, Ascalon spiraled into sight. The sword's cycling metal reflected the fire's light as it arced over Slasher to land beside Sir George's hand. Sir George grasped its cool hilt and swung the blade up toward the dragon, who was nearly upon him. By the time Slasher saw the sword, he was doomed. The sword pierced through Slasher's scales, giving him a mortal wound. Nostrils steaming, his body fell to the ground. All at once, the fire went out. Sabra rushed toward Sir George. The knight, whose side still sunk, slowly stood up from the ground. Sabra smiled. "'Tis about time." The couple embraced. After a long moment, Sir George held up his sword. "You know," he said, looking over the region's strange stone formations to the clouds of smoke still rising from the distant farmland hills, "the sword can do more than win battles." With that, he drove the sword's blade deep into the earth. Instantly, the charred earth transformed. Sabra was awed as she watched Ascalon heal the land. Green grasses and vibrant flowers grew from the soil around the sword's point. Like spilled paint, the colors of new life spread outward over the rocky slopes to the burned farmland hills and kingdom beyond. That night, Sir George knew everyone in the land would join together for a banquet feast to honor his victory over the dragon. Sir George and Sabra would sit beside one another. Everyone would eat, many would dance. After all, Sabra was safe, the land was renewed, and the kingdom would never be attacked by Slasher again. The